In this video, I want to demonstrate how to create a simplified version of a Baja competition car and then do an analysis. Now, it should be understood that this is just an intro level of doing some geometry. It's not intended to be a fully functional tutorial for doing analysis on a frame. But if we look at what we have here, so I have a sheet metal floor plan, and then I have the frame itself, and I've done the frame as a single body, and I'll explain why here as I go through the process. And then I've also done a static simulation. The loads on this would obviously be dynamic, but I just wanted to show an introduction on getting a baseline analysis on our assembly. And so if I go to the results, so we'll see how I achieved these results. The first thing I'm going to do is change the document units. So I'll go to the document settings and I'll click on the edit pencil for the units, and I'll change those units then to inch units. I'll say OK to that. Then I'm going to click on the view cube and I'm going to rotate around so the Z is pointing up and X is pointing over to the right. I'll right click on the view cube and I'm going to say set that current view as the front view. So I have front with Z up, X going over to the right. I'll turn on the origin folder, which is the XY, XZ, YZ plane, and I'll click on create sketch and I'll select this plane, the XZ plane. And then I'm going to draw a line horizontally from the origin. Now I have this 3D sketch option turned on. I'm going to turn that off, and later we'll turn this back on. So let's turn that off though for now. I'm going to draw a line over horizontally, and I'm going to make this line 48 inches long. Now we can either type in the dimension as we create it, or we can go ahead and create the line and then we can do dimension to dimension that line 48 inches long. Then I'm going to draw another line. From the end of this line, I'll draw this up at an angle, and I'll go to the dimension command, and I'm going to dimension the angle between this line and this line as 80 degrees. I'll then dimension the height from this line up to the end point of this line as 36, and I'll draw another line from the end of this line down here, up past the origin, over about like this, and then back down to the origin. I'll do dimension, and I'll dimension the height of this line as 7.5. I'll dimension the angle between this line and the horizontal line, and I got that in there wrong, so let me undo that and do it again. So I'll do dimension between this line and this horizontal line. I want that angle dimension 75 degrees. And I accidentally left out a line up here that I intended, and so I'm going to delete this line. We'll put it back in again. So I'll delete that line and I'll come over horizontally. So that's the line I left out, and then I'll come down to here. I'll then dimension from this point, from the origin to this point, that horizontal distance is 30. Notice that the sketch turns black. It's all fully defined. I'll click finish sketch and I'll save my part. Okay, I'm going to rotate it around a little bit, and you can either use, depending on how your mouse is set up or Fusion is set up, you can use the shift wheel or just hold the wheel on your mouse to rotate. So again, that depends on how your Fusion 360 is set up. I'm then going to do a new sketch on the XY plane. So I'll click on that plane, or that's the top plane, the way I have this labeled. And I'll do a new sketch. Now your sketch might have rotated around, depending on how you have Fusion set up. Rotate it back so that you can see this more as a 3D image. And I'll draw a rectangle. Now as I do these, I have edited my ribbon. You might have to go in here and select the 2-point rectangle, and the same with most of the operations. It might be slightly different on your screen than my screen. I'm going to do a rectangle about like that. And then I want this point right here projected down to this sketch, and I want this point right here projected down to that sketch. So I'll do P for project, and I'll select this point on the end here. I'll select this point on the end here. We can see it projecting it down to here and to here. We'll say OK to that. And so I have a purple dot right here and a purple dot right here. That's projected geometry. I'm then going to do a midpoint, and again, you might have to get this from the drop down. I want the midpoint of this line at that purple dot. I want the midpoint of this line on that dot. I'll hit escape to get out. Now I see that there's a horizontal constraint on this line and on this line. I don't actually want those lines horizontal, so I'll delete those two horizontal constraints. And now if I drag this point towards the inside, we see that I can make this shorter than this one. And so I'm going to dimension then this line as 12 inches. And I'm going to dimension this one as 36. Notice that everything turns black. It's all fully defined. So that completes my first two sketches. I'll finish the second sketch, and if I come over here and I expand this, so here is my sketch number 1 and here's my sketch number 2. If I want to edit a sketch, I'll right click on that sketch and select edit sketch. So I'm going to go back to the front view and I will select the XZ plane. I'll right click and I'll tell it to create a new sketch on the XZ plane or the front plane. And I'm going to then draw a line horizontally above the origin about right here over to about right here, and then I'll put some dimensions on here. So I'll dimension from the origin to this point, and I want that horizontal, not the aligned length. I want the horizontal distance to be 0.875, and then I want the length of this line to be 46.25, and then I want the vertical height from here to the origin. I want that vertical height to be 1.01. Okay, so let me spread these dimensions out a little bit so you can see those clearly. So 0.875 from the origin over, 1.01 from the origin up, and then the length of this line 46.25. I'll then draw another line, and I'm going to draw this up here about like this. I'm going to go a little bit above sketch number 1, and I'll come over horizontally, or either horizontal or parallel to the first line that we did. And I'll come out here and I'll come back to this point, not to the origin. I'll come back to this point. Okay, I'll put some dimensions on here. So I'll dimension the angle from here to here as 80 degrees. Now I could make this line parallel to the line in sketch number 1, but I'm going to do it separately in case I want to change those angles separately. And then I'll dimension the distance from this line up to this line, that vertical height, as 35.5. And I'll dimension from this point to this point, not to the origin, to this point. I'll dimension that as 29. I'll dimension the angle between this line and this line, the angle 75. And then I'll dimension from this point to this line, that vertical height 6.25. Okay, so this sketch turns black. We see that it's slightly different than the sketch number 1. I'm going to turn off the visibility of sketch number 1 and sketch number 2. So I just click on the eyeball here to hide those two sketches. I'll do finish sketch, and I'm going to rotate around a little bit, and I want to do a new sketch on this top plane, or in this case it's the XY plane. So I'll right click on that. I'll do a create sketch. I'll draw my 2-point rectangle as we did on sketch number 2. I'll draw that rectangle about like that. I'll do P for project geometry. I'll get this point out here on the end of this. It's going to project it down to here. So I'll get this point, and I'll also get this point back here. I'll say OK to that. Then I'll do midpoint, the midpoint of this line to that point, and the midpoint of this line to this purple dot here. Again, I'll delete these two horizontal constraints, and if I drag this in, we see that we can make this shorter. And I'll put some dimensions on here. So I'll dimension this line, and I want that line to be 33, and I want this line to be 10.5. If I look at that from the top view, and so I have this one is 33, this one is 10.5. I'll finish that sketch and save it. I'm going to make sketch number 1 and 2 visible again, and I'll hide sketch number 3 and 4. So actually, if I turn all 4 of them on, so they looked similar, but they were slightly different in size. Let's go back and sketch 3 and 4, turn those off. I'm going to come up here, I'll do extrude, and I'm going to select sketch number 2, and then I'm going to tell it, instead of distance, I'm going to tell it to go to object, and I want to go up to the top of sketch number 1. So I'll click up on this point and we'll say OK to that, and that extrudes that up. Now when I did that, it hid sketch number 1, so I'm going to turn sketch number 1 back on, the visibility. I'm going to do extrude again, and if it doesn't automatically select sketch number 1, you might have to do a long left click, and then you can select profile to get that. And I just unselected it, so I'll do that long left click again. I'll get profile, so I've got that profile, and I want to go symmetric, and I want to go through all, and it shows that it's going to cut away that center portion, but actually that's what I want to keep. So I'm going to come down here, I'll select intersect, so I keep the intersection between those two sketches. I'll say OK to that. I'll hide sketch number 1. Did something right, I'll save it. I'll then right click on this bottom edge, and I'm going to select chamfer, and I'm going to set it, instead of equal distance, I'll do distance and angle. My distance will be 8 inches, the angle is 15 degrees. Now when I preview this, I see that it's not going the direction that I want, and so I'm going to tell it to flip that direction. And so now the 8 inches is coming up here, and I have the 15 degrees, that's what I want. I'll say OK to that. I'll rotate around to the other side, I'll select this edge, right click, do chamfer, and again I want distance and angle. The distance is 8 inches, the angle is 15 degrees, and it's previewing the wrong direction, so I'll flip that direction, so that's the direction I want. I'll say OK to that. I'm then going to rotate around to this side. I'm going to select this short edge down here, and I'll do chamfer again, and this time I want for my distance to be 10.5, and I want the angle to be, actually I want this one to be a 45 degrees, so I'll do equal distance. So equal distance will give me a 45, so 10.5 and 10.5 along that edge, and then I'm going to hold down the control key, and I'll also select this edge so it puts that same fillet along that edge. Okay, so I have the two 15-degree fillets here and the 45-degree fillet here and here. I'll save it. Then I'm going to do a new sketch, and I'll select any one of the planes. I'm going to select the YZ plane, and I'm going to check mark this 3D sketch, so make sure that that's check marked. And then I'll go to the create pull down, and I'm going to tell it project include, and I'll tell it to include 3D geometry. And then I'll select this edge and this edge. Now actually I want all 4 of those edges, so I can just select the face. It'll project all 4 of those edges. I'll select this face to project those edges of that face. I'll select this face, this one, this one, and this one, and this one, and this one. So I have all of those edges projected. If I come over here to where it says bodies, and if I expand that, so I have a solid body right now. If I turn off the visibility of that solid body, here we can see those edges which I have projected. Let's draw one more line. So these edges we all projected. I'm going to draw a line from here over to here. I'll hit escape to get out of that command. Alright, now I don't really need this body anymore, so I'm going to finish this sketch. So that body was just to make it easy to generate this 3D sketch. And so that's a trick that I often use, is do some solid geometry in order to control or create my 3D sketch. And so I'm going to now remove this, and I can't delete it because the sketch is based off of this body, but I'm going to tell it to remove that body. Okay, so what I'm left with then is these sketches, and of course I can go back. So here's my history timeline marker. If I go back, so there the body still existed. If I drag this over, the body is removed. I'll save this file. I'm going to turn off the visibility of the origin, so I'll click here on this eye, and maybe close that down. And then I'm going to come up here to the top of the browser, and I'm going to right click and I'll say create a new component, and I'll call that component, call it Baja frame. I'll say OK. So now notice this radio button is highlighted next to the Baja frame. So that's the active component. If I go back up here and click on this radio button, this is the assembly. So that would make the assembly active. I want to make this component active. So the radio button down here. I'm then going to go to the create drop down and I'll do pipe. And I want to do a circular profile. I'll turn off this chain select. Now I could leave that chain select on, but it might select a chain that I don't intend, so I'm going to turn that off. And I want it to be hollow on the inside, so I'll select this as hollow so that it makes it as a pipe rather than a solid rod. And I'll go around and I'll select these bottom edges on my 3D sketch. Now I'm doing this as one single solid body, but in reality it would be several pipes that are welded together. I'll leave my section size as 2 inches. I'm going to change the wall thickness to 0.154. I'll say OK to that, and that creates those pipes and it miters the ends. I'm going to make sketch number 5 visible again, but notice I'm still active though in the Baja frame. I will go to create pipe again. This time I'm going to select these edges along the top. Make sure you get these short edges. And again, I want that thickness to be 0.154. And I'll leave this. I'm trying to decide whether I want to leave this as a new body or join. I'm not sure what it'll do if I do join because it's separated here. Let's go ahead and select join and see what it does. And so I'll say OK. And if I go over here and I expand the Baja frame and the bodies, I see that even though I had it on join, it didn't join those two bodies together. So we'll need to join those later on. So then I'll do a new pipe, and you could click on this dot 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 and pin that to the toolbar, or you could pin it in your shortcuts. And so now I just have to go here instead of going to the drop down. So I'll do pipe and I'll select this one going across here. Again, I want that 0.154 for the wall thickness, and I have this on join now to join that to the bottom. Now I'll do pipe again, and I'll select this one. I'm going to select a short one right here and this one right here. I'll also get this one. Now it won't let me get those, so I'll go ahead and say OK to this one. And now I've got it on join, but I think it'll join it to this down here, but I don't think it's going to join it to this up here. So let's change that 0.154 for the wall thickness. Now if you click on this dot dot dot, that you can just select it from this list after we've used it. And then I'll do the pipe on the other side. Actually, I've put it up here, so I'll select this one, this short line, this line, and I'll select the thickness 0.154, and then I'll do pipe again. I'll do this one. And I was tempted to do that one earlier with these two, but it looks like it's okay to do that now. And so I'll change that wall thickness. And then I'll do these two in the back. So I'll do that one. And I need to go ahead and accept this one. I'll do the next one. And then I'll do these two together. So I'll do this one and this one for the wall thickness 0.154. I'll do the other side, this one and this one 0.154. And then I'm going to do one across here and one across here. Now I wish I'd put a line going across here too, I think. I guess I'll just leave that out, but we could always add additional geometry to our sketch number 5 if we want to add more frame members to this frame. So I'll do another pipe onto this one, the wall thickness, and I've got one more to do over on this side, so I'll do that pipe, wall thickness 0.154. Okay, so once I have my frame members in, I'll hide sketch number 5, and so there we can see our frames. Now, if we're doing this in the real world, we might do the miters a little bit different than what Fusion did them automatically, but I'm satisfied with this for our purposes. Now I need to join those two bodies together, so I'll do combine. Now this might be on the drop down here, so I'll do combine, and I'll select this base part, and I'll select this body up here. I'll say OK to that. Now that's joined together as one solid body. I'll save it, and I'll continue on. I'm going to go back to the top level and make it active again, and then I'll right click here and I'll tell it to create a new component, and I'm going to call this one sheet metal pan. Now I could tell it I want to do this as a sheet metal part to start with, but I'm actually going to do it as a standard part and then convert it to a sheet metal part. So I'll say OK. My sheet metal pan is now active. I'm going to turn on sketch number 3 and 4. I'll turn off the visibility of the frame. Okay, so now I see sketch number 3 and 4 visible. I will do extrude, and I'm going to select this sketch, and I'll tell it to go, instead of distance, I'll tell it to go to object. I'll select up to here. I'll say OK to that. That hid my sketch number 4. I'll turn the visibility of sketch number 4 back on. Actually, it's sketch number 3. Turn sketch 3 back on. I'll do extrude. Again, if it doesn't automatically select that, do a long left click to get that profile. And then I'm going to tell it to go symmetric. And I want to go to all. And I want it to find the intersection rather than cut. I'll say OK to that. I'll hide that sketch number 3. I'm then going to select this edge, and I'll do chamfer. And I want that to be distance and angle, 8 inches for the distance, 15 degrees for the angle. I want to flip that angle. Now before we did these separately, I could just click on this plus symbol. So this one's previewing OK. And I'll click on this plus symbol, and then I'll select this edge, and I'll put in the 8 inches for this edge and the 15 degrees. And we see that it's not previewing as I wanted, so I'll click here, and now it's symmetrical on both sides, and I'll say OK to that. So that was doing it as one feature rather than two separate features. It will work either way. I'll then rotate around, and I'll right click on this edge, and I'll do a chamfer. I'm going to put it back on equal distance, and I'll do 12 inches on that edge, and then I'll hold down the control key, select the smaller edge, not this edge up here, select this shorter edge like we did over here, and I'll say OK to that. I'm then going to right click on this edge, and instead of doing chamfer, this time I'll do fillet, and my fillet radius will be, let's just hold off on putting the radius. Let's go ahead and select all of these edges on the bottom, including this short little edge right here. Now we probably could select that face to get that in one selection, but I've got around and select all those edges on the bottom. I'm going to select these edges going vertically, and I'm trying to decide, I don't really want that edge, so I'm going to control unselect that edge so that it isn't selected. I'll get this edge, I'll get this edge, and this edge. One more edge, this edge. So far I have 12 edges selected, the bottom edges, and then these vertical edges. Not this edge though, and the corresponding, not this edge over here, just the short piece here, not this one, the short piece here. And I'll then put in my radius 0.25, and I'll say OK to that. Did something right, I'll save it. Now the next step is a little bit tricky. So I'm going to go to the Surface tab, and under the Modify drop down I'm going to select Delete, and I'm going to delete this face, and I'll delete this face. So the top and the front, I'll delete this side face, I'll delete this face, and then I'm going to zoom in here and I'm going to delete this corner face right here, and then this face right here. Now be careful you get the face, not the edge, not a point. If you accidentally get a point or an edge, you can control unselect that selection. So I'll get that edge. So I've got that corner and that edge. I'll do the same thing on this side. I'll get this corner and this edge. Now if you have trouble, you can do these in steps. You don't have to do it all at once. So I've got those corners, those two edges. I'll come over to this side and I'm going to select this corner, and I'll select this edge, and I'm also going to select this edge. Okay, so I've got that corner and those two edges. I'm going to come over here, I'm going to select this corner and this corner. I'll come over onto this side, I'll select that fillet edge on that side, and I'll select this corner and this face. Alright, so now if we see what I have, so I've got these two sides selected, I've got the top and front selected, I've got the front edges here and the corners, I've got the edges here and the corners, and I've got only the corners selected here, so the corners selected there or there, and then this edge and this corner on that side. We'll say OK to that. So what I've done is I've just put some rips in here for my sheet metal. So those gaps are my rips for the sheet metal. And next we will thicken this, and then we will unfold it. And then these are the bends for our sheet metal with the fillets that I left in here. From the Surface Create menu, I'm going to do Thicken, and I will select this body. It selects the entire body. I see the arrow is going to the outside. I actually want to go to the inside, and so I'm going to do minus 0.125. 0.125 is my sheet metal thickness, and I'll say OK to that. And so now if I expand this and I expand the bodies, I have the solid body which I just created, and I have the surface body that I used to thicken to create this solid body. I'm going to remove the surface body, so I'll right click and I'll say remove. Again, we can't do delete because the solid body is based, so we'll do remove to remove the surface body. I'll then go to the sheet metal tab, and from the create drop down I will select to convert to sheet metal. I will select this face right here as my fixed face, and I want to actually, it just asked me to select someplace, but I'm going to select this face on the inside of the bends, and then I'm going to select a material, and I'm going to select an aluminum inch material. Now it's going to change that thickness based on the thickness of our part, and so I'll say OK to that. And then over here notice it says that it converted that from the sheet metal part, and the thickness is 0.125. I'll then click here on create flat pattern, and it asks me to select a stationary face. I always select the face inside the bend. So here's a bend here, here's a bend over here. I'll click inside here, I'll say OK to that, and so there is the flat pattern. I accidentally rotated it around. On this flat pattern, I might do this as two separate sheets, so I might take out this little bend in here, and then just do this as one sheet, and then do this as one sheet. But that would be easy enough to change it any time, so I'll just leave it the way it is for my flat pattern. Now I want to change the material on this, so I'm going to, even though our sheet metal rule says aluminum, I need to change the material to aluminum, so I'm going to right click on this top node up for that component, and I'll go physical material, and I'll get down to my metals, and I'm going to select an aluminum. I'm going to do aluminum 6061. I'll drag that up into my document, and I'll drag it over then onto my part, and so now this part is a material. Now when I change that, I get a warning here for the flat patterns is out of date. If I click on it again, it updates that flat pattern. And so there we have the flat pattern for this part. And if I go to the Baja frame, here is our frame. So that sheet metal pan fits inside of my frame. Next we'll do an analysis. To clean up the clutter a little bit, I'll restore down the sketches. And so here's my frame component, my sheet metal. I'll go to the top level, click on the radio button for it, make it active, and then I'm going to do my analysis. So I'll go to the design tab and I'll do simulation, and I'm going to do a static stress analysis. I'll tell it to create that. I'll leave it on the default static stress, and I'll create study. And let's rotate this around a little bit, and I'm going to expand the load case. I'll expand the loads, and I'll expand the contacts. Now actually I just turned that off. We haven't created any contacts yet, or constraints, but we'll put those in. And then I'm going to click here for the edit pencil for the study materials, and we see that we have the steel for the frame, the aluminum for the sheet metal pan. I'm going to go up here to constraints, and I'm going to put a fixed constraint on this point right here where one of the axles would be attached with some brackets. I'll do a fixed point there. I'll say OK, and I'll do another fixed point constraint on this point right here. Okay, so I have those 2 points selected as fixed constraints. I will then put another constraint, but this time I'm going to do, rather than fix, I'm going to do a pinned constraint on this bar up here in the front. And so I have it set so that this bar could still be free to rotate, but it is fixed in the radial direction. That is, the bar doesn't get bigger or smaller, the pipe, and it doesn't move along this axis. I'll say OK to that, and then I want to define my contacts. So I'll do automatic definition of contacts. So I'll do contacts, and I'm going to tell it that anything that was within 1.5 inches, set that as though it was welded together. So there's some gaps in between here. Some of the gaps are less than 1.5 inches. So I'll say anything that's less than 1.5, treat that as though it was welded together. So I'll tell it to generate those contacts. And so now I come over here to the contacts, and I'll click on this edit pencil. And so if I click on this, I see that there's a bonded contact, and I believe this is between the bend. So that bend surface right there and this. Now yours might be in a different order. And then I have a contact between the bend over on this side and that pipe, between this face back here and this pipe up here, between this face and this pipe, between, I'm not sure why that's a repeat, looks like it's the same face. Between it, one thing, if I have both sides of this sheet metal within 1.5 inches, it could pick both sides of that. I think what it's did, that's what it's done there. I could remove one of those, but that's not going to make a big difference on this one, so I'm going to leave it alone. And then the same kind of situation on this. Both sides of this are bonded to that. I'm tempted to remove that, but I think I'll just leave that alone. And then both sides here again. So I think 3 of those that I could remove, but they're not going to make a difference. One that I was expecting, though, was between the bottom of this and this pipe right here. So I'm going to say OK to that, and I'll put that one in then manually. So under contacts, I'll do a manual contact, and first it asks me to select the bodies that I want to put in contact. So I'll select both of these bodies. So I selected the pan and the pipe, and then it asks me to select a face that I want to bond together. I'll select that face. I want to bond that face, and then I'll go to second selection. I want to bond that face to this face, and I might have done that in the wrong order. There we go. And so a contact set, I'm going to set those as bonded, and I'll say OK to that. Now I want to go back and verify that, So I'll go back over here to my contacts. I'll click on the edit pencil, and so I have this manual. The M stands for manual bonded contact, and if I click on it, I see that that is between the bottom of this part and the top of that pipe, or the outside of that pipe, which is what I intended. Alright, now I want to put the load in here. Now the load, if I go ahead and try to do a load, it's going to spread it out across that entire face. But that's not really what I want, because most of the load would be here where the engine and the driver is seated. And so I need to define an area where that driver and the engine load would be. And so I'm going to click on this Simplify tool, and I'll create a new sketch. I'll do Create Sketch, and I'll click on this face inside here. I'll then do a rectangle, and I'm going to do that rectangle about like this. Now I'm intentionally not putting dimensions in here. I'll go ahead and finish that sketch. I could make this a shape other than the rectangle, but I'm just putting in a rough location for the majority of that load. If we need a more precise shape or precise dimensions, we could put those in. But every person that sits in this is going to be different, and I guess the engine would pretty much be the same, but I'm just going to use that rectangle as it is. And then under Modify, I'm going to do Split. I'll tell it to split face, and it asks me to select the faces to split. I want to split that face, and then I'll get the selection tool. I'll select this rectangle, and I'll say OK to that. So what that did is that just split this part into two faces here. There's a face and there's a face. I want my load to be on that face. I'll do Finish Simplify, and then I'll go to Load, and I'll select that face for my load. So before it was spread out and across the entire bottom of this part, now it's just concentrated in that area. And I'm going to do, say, 250-pound load in that area. So I've defined my material. I define load. Actually, I want to define gravity too, so I'll click here for gravity, make sure gravity is pointing in the right direction. And so let's go back through this. So I have my materials, I have my loads, gravity, and plus the 250-pound force load. I have my constraints. I have fixed constraints in the two back corners here and here. I have a pin constraint up here that allows a rotation but no translation on this bar, and then on the along the axis. And then I'm going to also look at the contacts. If I go to my contacts, we verified those contacts. We're ready to run our analysis. So notice there's a green check mark here, or if I click on that, it tells me that that study is ready. If it isn't ready, it will tell you what is missing, what you need to add to run the study. And I'll go ahead and click Solve. Now I can solve this on the cloud, or I can solve it locally. I'm going to solve this locally. If I have something that's going to run for a long time, let's say hours, then I'll run it on the cloud, and Fusion will send me an email when it is completed. Or we can just come back to the file and it will let us know when it's finished. I'm going to do Solve, and we'll go ahead and run that analysis. Now really, one thing I should have done before I run the analysis is to run the mesh first. And let's talk a minute about this mesh. We have some really thin parts compared to some thicker parts, or an extreme aspect ratio. This might have been better solved with thin body or features. Fusion doesn't have that type of analysis. Also, the frame might be better solved with a beam elements frame analysis, but Fusion doesn't have the beam elements analysis. So it looks like it meshed it reasonably well, and we could drill down deeper and decide, I probably want at least 2 divisions across the thinnest area, maybe 3 divisions, but that would have really slowed things down. Mine took about 5 minutes to solve, I think a little bit less than that. If I come over here to the load cases, right now I'm looking at the safety factor. If I put it on stress, so we see where the high stress area is, and I'm going to turn off the display of that mesh again. So I'll turn off the mesh. This is an exaggeration here, so to show it the actual deformation, I'll click here for actual. And so again, my high stress area is in this area. I'll come over here to my displacement. So most of my displacement occurs right here in this area. And so we may want to, in fact I'm pretty sure you'd want to put another beam element across here, and so the seat that the person is sitting on would be bolted to the beam here and to here. And then you may want one up here too where they would put their feet in the pedals of the steering column, because all of that would put a load, more of a load up here as well. And then if I want to just look at one component or the other, I can come over here to my components and I can expand this, and I can turn off the frame and look at just the sheet metal, or I could turn off the sheet metal and look at just the frame results. So that is a quick introduction. This isn't meant to be a comprehensive analysis, but it gives you some ideas to get started. And if we want to, we can animate, for example, the displacement. If I want to see how that part bends, and I might need to exaggerate that bending. We'll go ahead and play it. And so the frame by itself, and again we could exaggerate that to show that more, and it's actually it's bending so little that it's not going to really show us. It's less than the thickness of a sheet of paper. Let's go to the sheet metal, and I'll exaggerate that, and I'll play that so we can see how that sheet metal. So if this isn't bonded over here, it's going to pull that towards the inside and then push it down here in the center if we don't put another beam down here. So at least you could use that to make some early initial starts on making changes. And we probably weld these edges across over here as well, bond those together.